I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations people who may be joining us today. Sovereignty has never been ceded. I am Ruth Gormley. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I lead the strategic marketing team at Creative Victoria, and I'm proud to be working with Arts Hub to develop and present these Recovery Roadmap webinars. As we move into week 227 million of the pandemic's impact on our sector and our lives, we're turning our minds to the effect that this is having on the people who make up our audiences. Today's session is Understanding Audiences in a Pandemic, led by Tandi Palmer Williams, the driving force behind research agency and thought leaders Patternmakers. Tandi was a highlight of last year's Recovery Roadmap webinar series, talking about the results to date of the Audience Outlook Monitor, an international research piece into the thoughts and behaviours of audiences in this time of pandemic. Today, Tandi is here to share her insights about what has changed another year in. Hopefully you'll find the session useful, and something here will spark some thoughts and hopes for you and your work. On the housekeeping front, this webinar is being live captioned. If you'd like to access the captioning, just select Show Captions from your Zoom menu. We're also recording the session, so any questions you ask will be on record. The recorded webinar will be available through the Creative Exchange page on the Creative Victoria website and on Arts Hub. We will send out a survey following the webinar, so please fill that in and let us know how we've gone and what you'd like to see in future. And now I'll pass over to George Dunford from Arts Hub, who will be moderating today's discussion. George.
Thanks, Ruth. And I'd like to just also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land too, where we meet. We're really, really lucky to have Tandi back to speak to us again about audience patterns, which seem to change almost as quickly as our rolling lockdowns. As Ruth said, we're in 27 millionth lockdown down here in Melbourne. Tandi, joining us in Bundjalung country, is in a slightly different position, but has a great view across the whole world. Before founding the arts research organisation Patternmakers, Tandi previously held roles at PwC, Australia Council and Nest. The Audience Outlook Monitor has been really successful in capturing some of the changes that happen, and we're really lucky to hear from Tandi today. I think I'm just going to throw to Tandi, who's got a wonderful presentation. But before I do, we really want to try and get as many of your questions as we can. And if you can use the Q&A function to do that, we'll get some of those. We'll moderate those as we go along, and we'll also try to put any useful links in the chat so you can pick up on those and continue after this. But over to you, Tandi.
Thanks, George, and good afternoon, everyone. It's so lovely to be beaming in from Bundjalung country to connect with you today. So a week or two ago, I confess I actually thought about cancelling this webinar. I'm sorry, Ruth and George, I'm sorry to admit, because I did not want to add to the many, many voices and endless news updates we're confronted with at the moment. So being in New South Wales in an ongoing lockdown, I personally am finding it vital to manage my own intake of news right now, and particularly news that I personally can do very little about. Are you too? I'm really curious to know what made you decide to come today, and what would you like to know? We've got the Q&A function set up, so if there's something you're burning to get out of today's session, to let us know. I'll let you know that my breakthrough moment came when I started re-examining the data that we have from almost 9,000 respondents collected about 6 weeks ago in early July. And whilst there is much, much uncertainty and things seem to change day by day, there's actually lots we do know about audiences, and that also won't change as quickly as some of the case numbers seem to change, and which we can do something about. So I believe that if we continue to make informed decisions and act based on the facts that we do have, then we will be doing the very best job that we can right now. So the insights I'm going to share with you today are from the most recent survey of arts audiences across the country. So we had almost 9,000 respondents this time. The previous data I'll also refer to in March. That was from about 13,000 respondents, just remembering that these respondents are audience members within the databases of our 130 participating organisations. And I just want to acknowledge the support of Creative Victoria, the Australia Council and state arts agencies around the country for us at Patternmakers and Wolf Brown, our partners in the US, to be collecting this data on an ongoing basis. And a special hello and thank you to any of the participating organisations whose work we are really relying on to create this amazing data set that is informing so many decisions right now. So thank you so much. My colleague Holly is here today as well, and she's going to be sharing some links throughout the session, and you can read up a little bit more on the methodology if you're interested in that. I won't linger on it too much today. So I'm going to share some slides in a moment, and looking forward to hearing your questions. We're going to have hopefully a good discussion as we go through. So basically, I think it's fair to say that I'm going to start with the most important thing that's on everyone's mind, and that is vaccination. So we know that vaccination has become a major factor, I'm going to say the major factor in the decision-making of many audience members around the country. And some are waiting for themselves to be fully vaccinated, or for their family or their community to have higher vaccination rates before they resume attendance. So therefore, it's really positive to see that in early July, when we collected data from arts audiences, we could see that arts audiences were being vaccinated at a much faster rate than the general population. And based on the proportion of unvaccinated audiences who say they will definitely get vaccinated, it's likely that we're going to reach, over 90% vaccination rates in our audience base very quickly. And we could reach as high as 96% if the proportion of unvaccinated audiences who say they will probably get vaccinated also end up doing so. So the outlook there is really, really positive. So I'm going to also show you some data in a moment, and I hope you are data lovers out there, because I've got a fair few stats for you today. I've also got some quotes from audience members that I'm going to share with you, and I'm looking forward to having a discussion about some of this as well. So the other thing to note about vaccination is not only the personal vaccination status of our audience members, but basically our audience are fairly confident in vaccination overall in terms of its ability to help us move through the pandemic. So basically, as you can see on the next slide, most arts audiences are either very confident in the blue or somewhat confident in the pink that vaccination will help us kind of overcome the current challenges and allow regular activities to resume within 12 months. I will say that overall there is that confidence in vaccination. The timeline in terms of when things will get back to normal shifts, and in terms of what we think of as normal is also shifting all the time. But basically, we should be confident that our audiences want and expect to see things getting back to pretty much normal once we can achieve high levels of vaccination. So what I will start to talk about a little bit more now is kind of that short term that we're all facing in the next little while. And what I want to mention here is about the risk tolerance of audience members. So basically in the short term, one of the things that we need to expect is that Delta has changed things a little bit. So in terms of the risk profile of audiences, which I'm showing up on the slide at the moment, what you can see in the red, starting at the top, was the early days of the pandemic, the proportion who said that they were ready to attend now or as soon as it's permitted was around 22%. And that increased right up to 68% in March. Over the summer, we had relative levels of freedom that seem really, oh gosh, we miss those times now, don't we, in Victoria, New South Wales. So we reached a high point in the late summer. And then in July, things have had a setback. So we saw that nationally drop back to 62%. And I'm showing here the New South Wales Metro results in early July. New South Wales was already in lockdown at the point of data collection. So we do look at those results as an indicator of what we are likely to see in other states that have since been affected by outbreaks. It's likely that this situation may have worsened a little bit, I'd say, since the time of data collection. But a good rule of thumb that we're working with at the moment is about 50-50. So we think that around 50% of audiences will be ready to go as soon as lockdown ends, and 50% will be managing risks. So they'll attend when the risk of transmission is minimal. And so for that group, things like COVID safety and vaccine passports are of key interest. So obviously, vaccine passports are being talked about more and more, and it's something that we're following really closely and planning to quantify sentiment around in the upcoming data collection in November. From the US, we do have some data, and I can talk a little bit more about that if that's of interest, but things are looking more and more favourable there in terms of vaccine passports as well. For now, what I want to say is that one thing is clear in the audience data, and that is that COVID safety measures are still very much valued by audiences. So up on screen, I'm showing you which measures audiences find the most encouraging in July. So basically, check-in procedures and upgraded ventilation systems with Delta are top of the list. Social distancing is also really important, but those measures appear slightly further down the list. You'll see that attitudes to those trend more to the neutral, because some people feel like they're not potentially adhered to once we're inside venues, and that it's may not be a kind of a meaningful measure for some people, but definitely social distancing still does remain really key. And face masks is an interesting one. The proportion of audiences who would be encouraged by mandatory mask policies almost doubled from the early days of the pandemic to the most recent data collection. And in areas affected by outbreaks, it's again much higher. So in Metro New South Wales at the time of data collection, it was about 4 out of 5 who found that really encouraging. So that would also put masks right at the top of the list in an outbreak situation. Another thing to mention that's not listed here, but that is a relevant consideration as we start to plan events for the summer and beyond, is the types of venues and seating preferences that audiences have. So when we test different options and say, which would you choose out of this list of kind of 4 options, what we find is that 4 out of 5 people would select an option with fixed seating. So whether that's an indoor event or an outdoor event, fixed seating is definitely the preferred kind of format for now, which is obviously a massive challenge for our sector. And I'm going to share a quote from a respondent up on screen, which says, as a theatre maker, I completely understand how much we all rely on achieving 100% capacity, but we aren't ready to go and sit next to each other. We need to return to having a spare seat between each group in the theatre. So for now, we can kind of get a sense of the paradigm that we need to be working inside of for the next little while in terms of keeping people safe. Just in case that's not quite enough for you to get your head around, we also have the economics of the situation. So I'm going to now talk a little bit about kind of lockdowns and what we're seeing in terms of audience confidence in relation to lockdowns. So basically, when we asked people in July about what factors would inhibit their attendance in the next 12 months, more than half of people, you'll see in the light green there on the left, said the risk of future lockdowns and cancelled events. And you can see compared to the March figure in the dark green that has jumped considerably over the last few months. And the risk of lockdowns closely followed by the risk of the virus. In outbreak areas, that's really top of mind. And that's followed by what we would call kind of supply issues. So there are not as many options available, or events are booking out too quickly. In regional areas, we actually see a much higher proportion of people say there's not as many options available, whereas in cities like Sydney and Melbourne, we're starting to see more people say events are booking out too quickly, and that being the kind of supply issue. So there you have it, a bunch of different factors for us to work around in the next little while. What I just want to say is that lockdowns do affect everyone around the country. As you can see here, I'm showing up on screen the proportion of audiences who said that in the past 4 months, their plans to attend have been affected by lockdowns or cancellations. So you can see, no surprises there, New South Wales and Victoria are on the left with the highest proportion of audiences being affected. But right around the country, a majority have been affected for different reasons, depending on where people are. But basically, it's been pretty devastating for all involved, and many audiences express not only disappointment for their own situation, but kind of deep empathy for all of the artists and teams who have been affected. So audiences, for the most part, they get it. They appreciate the forces out of anyone's control right now. One thing, though, that is making a difference in terms of how audiences feel about cancellations is communication. So I'm going to show you a couple of comments here about communication. So one person said, I'm still waiting on a refund from a Sydney event, which has cast doubt on booking any event because of the hassles I'm experiencing. Another person has said, I felt disappointed that we missed out on 3 events, but very impressed on how the venues handled it. Quick, clear communications, and where refunds were required, processed very efficiently. So something to note about communication is that good communication can actually kind of rescue a bad situation. And it's something that is really practical that we can take away at this point, is that good communication, no matter how an event is being handled or what the situation is, prioritizing clear and quick communication and explaining the factors that are going on and why it's being handled the way it is goes such a long way. And in fact, a cancellation can actually be a moment of really creating goodwill. It's quite amazing what we're seeing, just a real sense of connection and appreciation where it is handled well. So for those who are working in comms or marketing or audience facing role, yes, you have the power to actually turn a bad situation into a good one. So in terms of whether lockdowns are affecting confidence, obviously, yes. One of the things though I want to share is that the majority of people who've been affected are choosing to reschedule or hope to do so after lockdowns, whereas a minority say they opt for a refund. Obviously, there's so many different situations and different circumstances people are in, but basically the point I want to make is that yes, people's confidence has been affected, but what we are seeing is basically, especially where lockdowns are kind of affecting people's ability to attend, is that it kind of makes the heart grow even fonder. And some people are saying that they kind of want to make up for lost time outside of lockdown. So I'm going to show you another quote here now. I've realized how valuable the arts is, and I want to take any opportunity I can to go to things. You never know when you will be stuck at home again. Ain't that the truth? So the other thing I want to mention is that in terms of spending, it's really interesting actually. When we ask people how much they expect to spend over the next year, like the vast majority say they expect to spend the same or more than they used to. It's quite amazing. But Australians generally have been saving hard in lockdown. And according to recent figures, we collectively have squirreled away more than 140 billion since the start of the pandemic. So the capacity to spend is there. Obviously, much uncertainty remains in terms of what will be able to proceed, what events will be viable, what people will actually have to spend it on. But the intention to spend is there if we can go ahead and do that. So what I just want to mention is that although we are seeing that ability to spend, what the risk of lockdowns does is affect the kinds of buying behaviours that we're likely to see. And there's kind of a few different trends I want to talk about in terms of buyer behavior. The first is last minute decisions. The second is local leanings. And the last is for lighthearted events. So firstly, I'm showing up on screen the timing of when people were buying tickets for in July. So there's a lot of data on this slide, but basically what we see when we compare the timelines to what we've seen in previous periods is that in locked down areas, audiences will be looking further ahead. So for that spring, summer, that period when we all hope to be out of lockdown, we're likely to see people in lockdown looking ahead to that time. Outside of lockdown areas, we see more last minute decision making. So where there's kind of a looming threat of a lockdown or uncertainty around case numbers, that kind of thing in terms of how they might change, we're seeing people make more last minute decisions. And I think that's something interesting to think about long term, is how can we be ready for anything and how can we anticipate last minute decision making, and what does that mean for the types of events that we put on and how we market them and our contingency planning around that. So in terms of local preferences, so some audiences are choosing to manage the uncertainty of the situation by opting for local events. So one person here has said, for instance, I decided not to travel interstate to see a live theatre production, but purchase tickets locally for a date next year when hopefully the situation will be more predictable. So a couple of ideas in that quote. But as we look further ahead, people really are keen to get things in the diary for that post-lockdown period. We're hearing about events, over summer that are selling out, on sale now, that will happen in the summer, that are selling out in record time. and big ticket items too. So if it's within your power to put things on sale for down the track when we hope to be out of lockdown, it's certainly a way to kind of shore up those ticket sales for the future. So the other trend, just to mention, and I'm racing through because we want to make this short and sweet and get onto your questions, is that there is some changes in terms of the content people are looking for. So firstly, I need to say that overwhelmingly people want to see the same kinds of things that they used to. So this year, we've in the red, you can see 93% of people just want to see the same things they used to. And that was the same in the early days of the pandemic when we first asked this question. But when we asked if people want to see more lighthearted things, we are seeing a growing minority of people fess up to that. And I confess, I'm one of those people right now. I am loving my escapist fiction. I'm really keen to have be uplifted by the content I'm engaging with. And I'm sure out there amongst the participants we have here today that I'm not alone, but I think it's interesting to think about not just lighthearted or uplifting in terms of the content, but in terms of the experience that we can have at events. So audiences really miss all those kind of peripheral aspects of an event, the atmosphere, you know, catching up with friends or bumping into people, going to have a drink or some food and just be in a place with atmosphere where something exciting is happening. On the right, you'll see that works that help make sense of the pandemic has kind of interest in that has declined a bit. So I think what it means is for the more serious works in our programs, we really have to think about how they're positioned and how we support those within the context of a complete experience that we can deliver for people. The other thing to mention is that when it comes to content, we kind of asked audiences, this is actually data from late last year, but we asked about the role arts and culture can play in the recovery process. And we identified a set of themes, and Holly can link you to that if you're interested. But these are the themes that people talk about when they think about that kind of what we called then the post-pandemic period. But place, reanimating public places, bringing people together, helping us escape, healing, transformation, and rethinking the way arts and culture works. So basically, in a moment, I'd love to hear some questions and help you with whatever is going on for you at the moment, what you need help with. But just to recap, the 7 things that we do know about audiences right now that won't change overnight, and that we can make plans based on these trends. Number 1, they're confident in vaccination. Number 2, they care about COVID safety. So that is very much still important. And please pass on a big thank you to all of your teams who are managing this on the ground. It is a huge ongoing job. And we just so appreciate everything they are doing to make audiences feel safe and help build that confidence. Number 3, they value clear communication. Number 4 is that they really want to show their support. They really empathize with our situation. And so if you need support, particularly around cancelling an event, that is a pivotal moment where some audiences really want to make a donation and show their support. So don't be shy about creating those pathways or making those asks at this time. Number 5, they're eager to make plans as soon as they can. Number 6, they're leaning towards local and lighthearted. So we've seen minorities, but growing minorities exerting those kind of preferences. And number 7, they need arts and culture in their lives, and they see a really big role for arts and culture in the recovery process. So I just want to say on a personal note that if you are finding things really hard right now, you are not alone. I certainly am. I know this data paints a really complex picture. And right now it seems like we're fighting a war on 2 fronts. On the one hand, keeping people safe from the virus, and on the other hand, surviving lockdown and all that entails and working through the economic factors. This is really not easy. But please remember, I certainly did going over this data, that the medium to long-term view is very, very positive. So the most important thing that we can do for audiences is to play a long game right now and survive however we can through this time so that we can thrive when the time is right. So really be kind to yourselves, show your teams lots of love, especially those on the front line facing audiences right now. Be really strategic about what you put your energy into, and know that audiences are as eager as you are to find the solutions and get back together as soon as we can. So really looking forward to some questions now, George, if we've got time for that.
We've definitely got some time for questions. Yeah. I think if everybody's noted down the points there, do you want to just stop sharing that slide, Tandi, and we can
sure.
Go into questions? Yeah, thanks. People have been really enthusiastic with questions, and thank you for all of that wonderful data. I think a lot of people are part of that growing, looking for lighthearted and local events. This is definitely a change in programming, and really interesting to see that you're underscoring the importance of safety and vaccinations to audiences as well. That's amazing. I might just, we've got enough questions that I think I'll just go straight to audience questions, if that's okay.
Great.
Alyssa Panchaz has asked, are audiences still interested at all in free digital events, webinars in arts and culture? And, given that this is a free webinar, we hope so.
Yeah, so look, we haven't had time to go into the digital data today, but I can certainly point you in the direction of some insights there. Holly, maybe you can dig out the recent digital fact sheet and digital webinar, but basically the digital participation statistics have fallen quite dramatically since the early days of the pandemic when we saw that kind of boom. And now it's around 4 in 10 who are continuing to participate on a kind of fortnightly basis. So I'd say people are being a lot more selective about what they participate in. Screen time is definitely a factor. However, in lockdown areas, our kind of need for connection and need for culture can override the screen time thing. So it's kind of a case of, yes, people are still interested, but they will be quite selective. I think it would be good to look at the experience of some of the recent festivals and that we've got coming up around making some of those key decisions and potentially reaching out to some of the arts organisations that have been involved in digital festivals. So I would tread kind of cautiously, but certainly it's a reality that I think we're going to have to confront in the coming years, is having a digital backup plan for major events, or having a contingency, or thinking about what role the digital will play as a part of contingency planning for events. So I think it's a different situation for every person, every organisation. Tread carefully, but don't ignore the opportunity altogether, I'd say.
Yeah, I think a lot of events are planning with a digital hybrid kind of model. And I think the ones that are cancelling but still continuing with the digital presence are the ones that keep going and can start up again.
I think so. I think the technology is going to evolve pretty quickly. It's certainly long-term going to be a bigger part of how we all interact. I certainly think in 10 years' time, who knows what's going to happen. I'd say it's definitely an area to continue experimenting in, watch what other people are doing and what models seem to be working. Certainly we're seeing some really good statistics in terms of people paying for things. So whilst the overall participation rates are dropping, the proportion that are paying are willing to pay slightly more. So as those really quality experiences emerge, people are digging into their pocket for $50, $100 subscriptions, those kinds of things. So I would say less is more. Do a small number of things really well and kind of make sure that there's enough resource to really market them well, because obviously we know that discovery in the online space is kind of a real challenge. So I hope that helps for now, and Holly can point you in the direction of some more insights on that one.
I think the other really interesting thing that in the data was that you were saying that that cancellation point is when people actually feel very generous and may wanting to support you.
Definitely. It's a key time when people's heart really goes out to the teams involved, and it's a key point of communication. So it's an email that people tend to open, if you know what I mean. So don't be shy about having a donation pathway there. I think certainly at times like this, with people saving more, in our sector, people have been quite financially affected by these times, but outside our sector, the majority of Australians are earning well at the moment and saving well. So it is an important time to think about asking for donations and thinking about stewardship of donors through to that post-pandemic period. So how can we really look after the people that want to look after us and really strengthen those connections for the long term? It's quite kind of an exciting and pivotal time in that regard.
Great. Okay. Monica Currow, who joins us from a chamber music festival in Port Fairy, is one of a number of people who are cancelling events. And she said, having just cancelled our October festival 2 years in a row now, we're considering a smaller online version like we did last year. And her question really is there any point? Our audience in general is weary of online events as we are.
I mean, I think I've sort of answered that already in that, yes, some people are very fatigued by screen time. However, there is an audience base that are still engaging and paying. So I'd say tread cautiously there about what you do online. I think it makes sense to really look at that closely. Certainly I think it should be there should be a digital part to every event. We know that some audiences who are struggling with access issues right now for whatever reason, whether it's related to COVID or they experience a disability or something else, they've got caring responsibilities. There is a segment, around 1 in 10 of our audiences are really relying on those digital events, so they will be very much there. I think it's just managing expectations in terms of the volumes that we're going to see. Be interesting to follow Melbourne Fringe's model in the coming weeks and see how that goes. Really interesting models in terms of ticketing and stuff like that I think we can all learn from. So hello to anyone from Melbourne Fringe, and really excited to join you online for some events from New South Wales.
Another popular question that popped up from an anonymous attendee, is there a difference in the data and visitor expectations or confidence according to, different arts types? So museums, festivals, visual arts, is there any sort of way you could break these?
Sure. So certainly confidence is highest for museums and galleries. We see that especially the kind of spacious museums that are open all the time. There's, a strong confidence in how visitor flow is kind of managed in museums, and people see them as very safe spaces. So we'd sort of see kind of like 90% of confidence to go to a museum. Performing arts, including festivals, I'd say it's a little bit more challenging. Still, we see for certain types of venues, confidence can be pretty good. For the kind of live music, comedy club, where it's really intimate spaces, we see that start to be more marginal. So it's really, I'd say, most challenging for the performing arts right now. I think the key moments at performing arts events are things like when everyone enters, when everyone exits. They're moments when people feel a kind of breakdown of social distancing, and for those who do care deeply about it, it can be a little bit challenging. So I'd say social distancing is a key one to think about for performing arts venues. But do you know what? People are, like I mentioned that before, especially after lockdown, people are going to be so eager to get back out there. I'd say we're going to see post-lockdown, as soon as conditions do allow, things will sell really well, I think, and we should see that rebound. Obviously, when we will see that remains a mystery, but I'd have confidence that people are really keen to get back to performing arts events. They really miss that atmosphere and excitement of those kinds of events, and connection is what we're all really craving right now. So some challenges, but also some opportunities there, I think.
Great. I might roll together two questions from John Fleming and Susan Eldridge, who are both asking similar questions about how the US compares to Australia. Is there more audience confidence in the US?
Well, gosh, it's such an interesting question, and we have been having some really interesting conversations with our partners at Wolf Brown in recent months. I'll ask Holly to dig out, if she can, the International Perspectives webinar that we did recently with Alan Brown and the team at Wolf Brown, which was fascinating a few weeks back. It's such an interesting situation because in the US, a few weeks back, things were looking really good, and we sort of had a role reversal, whereas they were a bit envious of us over our summer period, and then things sort of started to reverse. But lately things have there's been a setback in the US again. So basically in the US, there's been, quite major outbreaks among the unvaccinated parts of the population, and some kind of different, more heightened issues around vaccination, some of which we're seeing here. But what's really interesting to note there, and Holly can share Alan's latest executive briefing, is that the proportion of vaccinated but reluctant respondents has jumped lately from about a third of respondents in June to half of respondents in August. So in other words, half of vaccinated respondents aren't going out until outbreak conditions improve. So it's kind of this dual thing of vaccination and managing an outbreak that needs to happen for confidence to, fully rebuild. vaccinated people are still in the US are still worrying about contracting the virus or transmitting it to people who are unvaccinated, such as children or people who can't or won't be vaccinated for whatever reason. So I think that's a little bit of a different situation to Australia, and we can't take what is happening there as what's going to happen here. But I think it's interesting definitely to follow the situation in the US. What they're seeing in the US data is actually feelings about proof of vaccine requirements are much more favourable than unfavourable, and they're trending more favourable. So we're seeing, 50% of people say they won't go out until there's a proof of vaccination required. So really interesting things emerging there, definitely ones to watch. And we're currently working on the design of our questions for the November data collection. So hopefully in a few more months, we'll be able to provide you with some up-to-date Australian data on things like vaccine passports.
Thanks for that comparison. That's really useful. Just a question from Hannah Tobin. What are you finding in terms of brand partnerships and sponsorships? Do brands have money to spend at the moment?
Absolutely. So, some businesses are doing really, really well right now. We all know some high profile examples of companies and billionaires getting richer, etc. So it's just thinking about for each sector, there's kind of different issues at play. But I think certainly and lockdown periods are a very kind of interesting and tricky time. I think what we're kind of looking at is brands looking to that kind of post lockdown period and wanting to align themselves with the right kind of partners. I think it's probably getting a little bit out of my comfort zone into a different, it's not necessarily audience related, but I think thinking about some of the audience trends that are going on might be positive and favorable to use in sponsorship pitches and things like that. For instance, what we're seeing around arts audiences and their desire to get back to events, to spend, to the fact that arts audiences are overwhelmingly likely to be vaccinated. So they're likely to be back participating in the economy in greater proportions than before. So definitely not my core area of expertise, but I think there are still opportunities around for sure.
Great. Okay, thanks. Another anonymous attendee asks, is anyone doing similar work asking arts workers about how they feel about audiences coming back? And, perhaps this is a question about their safety and how that's being protected.
Yeah, look, I think it's certainly one to watch. It's not something we're working on at the moment, but I will definitely have a bit more of a think about that one. I mean, I think, we're going to have to navigate the situation in terms of vaccination, for instance, quite carefully. I think certainly there's an opportunity for better consultation. So I think it's something that we're likely to see our funding bodies, and I know the Australia Council's doing some consultation as well around understanding sector needs, given the situation that we find ourselves in again, 2 states in lockdown and outbreaks around the country. I think, it's probably not something I can speak more about today, but certainly I think something we're going to have to work through in the next few months. That's going to require some careful consultation and conversation.
Okay. And 2 questions from Danny Webber and Tessa Hildebrand Burke that are related. And this may be something where Holly's got another report to hand. They're both interested in schools, teachers and students, and any insights into that segment you can offer at all. What's their desire around performing arts experiences at the moment?
Look, something, we'd love to do some study into this area. So if you are interested in that, please do get in touch and we might try and put together something for you to find out. Basically, schools are being pretty cautious right now about what experiences are offered on site, incursions and the like. we are seeing, you know, outside of New South Wales and Victoria, incursions are still kind of going ahead in many circumstances, but I'd say demand there is going to be a little bit suppressed potentially. However, online offers, it's a real time where teachers have really become much more able to interact online. And so I think looking at our online offerings for education is definitely something we should be investing in, and trying to make those as good as they can be to offer students what we can online. So something I'd love to be able to give you some more hard facts on, but I'd say we might see a period of suppressed demand from the school sector in terms of families, family audiences for shows. Again, children being unvaccinated is likely to affect decision making by parents. So we'll see kind of what happens there, I think, monitor closely in the next few months. I'd expect to see potentially some of those leanings towards local, you know, potentially coming out a little bit more strongly among family audiences. Obviously, you know, travel and stuff with a family is like a bigger risk, a bigger spending item. So I'd say some of that might be a little bit slower to recover. But certainly children have been kind of deprived of so many opportunities, and so there will be parents looking to expose their children to all kinds of things once we can kind of move through this next period. So I think there'll certainly be a good demand on the other side of this next phase.
Yeah, and I guess also things, you know, lockdown and homeschooling and things like that has really smashed parental expectations around screen time and, you know, limiting that. I think it seems like we're through the looking glass for that, and, you know, a lot of people are after quality homeschooling experiences or digital events that cater specifically for children that are going to be, you know, valuable or educational or even, you know, as you've said, lighthearted and mood changing.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I'm loving seeing some of the innovation for children and families with things like, you know, audio experiences for kids and families, and things like the parcels and boxes that can go out for kids into homes that aren't kind of screen experiences, but can be really meaningful for the kids who are just so hungry for stimulation right now.
Yeah, I think everybody's looking forward to things arriving in the post and looking for those interesting non-screen times, as you say, audio experiences. Surmsar bin Saad, who has been working on a playwriting festival in Melbourne called First Stories Festival for First Nations Writers and Mentors with Theatre Works, they have a question that's looking at how their festival can be made more accessible, I suppose, and how it will, in their words, you know, lack some connection. And they're wondering if you have any suggestions on how to approach this and what's the best platform to use, given that not everyone has that laptop or that, you know, that computer connection that, you know, that we've got. So perhaps there's something in the post audio experience.
Yeah. I'm not sure what to suggest there. I think that it's going to require some creative thinking. I mean, we know in terms of the First Nations audience sector that, you know, First Nations audiences really place a very high value on culture. And so they have, in some ways, shown an eagerness to get back to experiences and to participate even more so than the average audience. So some interesting things there. I mean, I think certainly I've seen a couple of questions about kind of participatory and interactive experiences. I mean, certainly that's something we're all really yearning for right now, being together, connecting socially, interacting. But it's going to be tricky in terms of COVID safety. So we need to really get as creative as we can about how we go about doing that and how we create that sense of connection whilst managing COVID safety. So I'd say, it's going to require all of our creativity, but for those who can come up with creative solutions, I think they will be very well rewarded with audience engagement, because it's something that's so needed right now.
Okay, great. We're almost out of time, but I think I can sneak in just one more question, if you'll allow me. You've been very generous with your time.
No worries.
Genevieve Becker asks, in terms of supporting creatives and, you know, what the data says about that, what can you suggest for supporting the creatives specifically, to diversify or postpone or to use another stream, are some of her examples?
Yeah, in terms of independent practitioners, is that what you're asking, George?
and you know what they can do to sustain.
Yeah, I'd say it's going to be different for everyone, but I think basically what I think we need to look at how we can survive and keep practicing. Each one of us needs to come up with our own kind of plan for that. I think for some, it's going to be hibernating, taking on other work. For others, it'll be finding the opportunities that are there or working online. I'd say it's really thinking about playing a long game. I think, lockdown could be weeks or months, but the coming years, who knows what we're going to face. So I think we need to really do the work now to plan for a time of great, really uncertainty and ongoing change, where we might see conditions change from season to season in terms of the challenges that we're battling with. So I think it's a real time to look at how we as individuals all work, how we gain, how we nourish ourselves artistically and culturally, but also make a living. I think that's going to be slightly different for everyone, but I'd say putting some thought into how it can work best for you and playing that long game is really what I'm doing right now.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think everyone's thinking about hibernating right now, but
yeah, look, a lot of we're working with a cohort of independent artists through Abbotsford Convent right now on the Pivot program, and some of those artists say it's been devastating on the one hand in terms of losing presentation outcomes, but on another hand, the ability to focus on creative development is its own blessing in a way. So I think as much as we can, looking for those silver linings of this time and trying to come up with new ways of working that will sustain us through this next period. It's enormously challenging. I don't want to, mislead anyone. It's enormously challenging, and I personally am finding it challenging. I know lots of teams are, and it's going to require all our creative thinking and commitment to get through it. So please accept my best wishes, and if there's anything we can do to help, please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Thanks so much, Tandi, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Creative Vic also for being our partner in this event. And thank you for so much wonderful data. We'll post the video for this as soon as we can. We hope to get this up later this week. But
yeah, George, I just wanted to mention too, if you're not already getting our updates, you can hop on over to our website and subscribe. Actually, next week, we've got a resource coming out on some evidence-backed practical tips for sustaining connections with audiences at this time. So if you're in that mode of really actioning strategies right now, we've got a whole bunch of tips and tactics that have been collected from people throughout the sector and the past dozen or so webinars that we've been doing. So if that's of interest, do sign up and it'll be landing in your inboxes in the next week or two.
Great. I think that link's in the chat too. Thanks again. Thank you for joining us out there, and thank you for persisting with art. We really hope that we're all in a hibernation and we're going to come out of some of those rolling lockdowns soon. We'll post the webinar as soon as we can, and our next webinar is on the 28th of September. We're looking at doing one that's going to concentrate on mental health and wellness during this difficult time. But that's about all. Please join me in thanking Tandi Palmer Williams for presenting such a wonderful study of the data, and apologies that we couldn't get to all of your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.